All right, so we are hitting the 6:30 mark, so we're going to get started here, and I'm going to kickstart by saying welcome to the C.A.S.T Community Awareness Night. So excited to have you all join us here. My name is Ashley Moore. I'm the Interim Executive Director for C.A.S.T, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking. We're located in the East Metro of the Twin Cities. And tonight, our mission here is to empower our community to end sexual exploitation. At C.A.S.T, we do that through prevention in the forms of education, awareness, and collaboration. And we do that through community awareness nights is one way we do that, because we believe that knowledge is power, and we want to give you the knowledge to understand what the problem is and the power to be part of the solution. And so for tonight, I'm going to give kind of a little outline of what to expect for this evening. And so tonight I'll be introducing our incredible panelists, and then we'll do an introduction to the topic tonight and have a series of set questions in place to really help you understand what are the risk factors that lead to somebody being exploited, and then what can you do about it to be on the solution side. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A. So our goal is to finish here at a hard stop at 7:30, unless we have a big influx of Q&A questions. Our panelists have agreed to stay on just a few minutes afterwards, just in case, but we're going to strive to end at 7:30. But if we have just a few minutes to roll over, that is an option, but 7:30 is our end time. So for our introduction for our incredible panelists, we're going to get started with Detra. Detra Escudero Ramirez is a licensed social worker with experience in a variety of areas, such as working with the Latino population, working with those of domestic violence, sexual assault, trauma, trafficking, and many more. For the past few years, she has worked with CLUES as the lead community resource navigator with school districts 621, 622, 623, and 624. And Detra is a passionate and humble social worker who believes in providing client-centered, equitable services. So Detra, we are thrilled to have you join us. Thank you for coming. Secondly, we have Dietrich Miller. Detra is passionate about building community and creating platforms that transform pain to purpose. She has a professional background in public health and human services, but she has a passion, but her passion has led her to organize and facilitate Sisters in Christ Youth Ministry, host family building activities and a book club at Healing House, and be invited to speak at the Girl Talk Conference and Freedom Works, and is the founder of Giving It a Voice. And Detra, we are thrilled to have you. Welcome. All right, and finally we have Tammy Jenky. So Tammy received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from the University of Minnesota, St. Mary's. She is licensed through the state of Minnesota as a marriage and family therapist. And Tammy has over 30 years of experience working with children and families in a variety of settings. She has particular interest in working with children, adolescents, couples, families, working through parenting, trauma, abuse and neglect, depression, grief and loss, anxiety, early childhood development, and addictions. So thank you so much, Tammy. We are absolutely thrilled to have you join us tonight. And so tonight, our topic that we're going to be discussing is called Understanding the Roots. We want to talk about the root causes that can lead somebody to be vulnerable towards exploitation, and the risk factors that can make someone more vulnerable. And then how can you identify those risk factors, and what can you do about it? How can you come alongside someone dealing with it, and how can you prevent it and get ahead of it? Oftentimes traffickers, they look for two primary vulnerabilities. They often look for a material vulnerability as well as an emotional vulnerability. And so we'll be talking about a series of risk factors that often feed into those. So the risk factors we're going to be talking about tonight, we'll be touching base on a history of trauma and abuse, domestic violence, addiction and substance abuse, poverty and homelessness, lower self-esteem, that culture of silence and shame, as well as intermixing the race and ethnicity, which weaves through all of it, as well as sexual orientation. Those part of the LGBTQ plus community are often at a higher risk. So I know that there are a lot of risk factors that we'll be covering tonight. And while our incredible panelists can speak on a variety of these topics, they've kindly elected to focus in on a couple of them for each. And so when I ask these questions, if our panelists want to mention kind of that key piece that they'll be focusing in on. We'll kind of go from there. You can say which topic you're talking about and then answer the question. And so excited, our final panelist joined us. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of Addie as well. So welcome, Addie. We are thrilled to have you here. And so then Addie Hammond is our fourth panelist. She is the founder of Cura LLC, which focuses on the power of transformation. Her great desire is to encourage and build strong client coaching relationships. Addie is certified as a life coach, motivational speaker, crisis interventionist, sexual violence advocate, domestic abuse advocate, trauma-informed trainer, and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences trainer. Addie has a strong desire to empower others to experience the beauty of transformation and reach their full potential. So Addie, thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you here as well. So just kind of gave the overview of the risk factors that we'll be talking about. And so the first question that I have for you is, how do each of these risk factors make an individual vulnerable to exploitation? So whichever panelist wants to take that question first, just highlight which of the risk factors you'll be talking about, and then you can dive into your answer.
I can jump in. Thank you. So I really would love to share from some personal experience. Growing up, raised with a family where we didn't talk about what was going on in our home. And this is about the culture of silence that is within our community. It wasn't viewed safe to talk about what went on in the home. We didn't talk about what went on in the home, but we also didn't talk with each other. And this tends to be common in communities of color. What we aren't talking about is wreaking havoc in our communities. The threat is not always some big scary monster out there. In my experience, it was close, it felt safe, and what I thought was love came directly from my community. Just sharing a quick example, I dated a guy and I perceived his attention and his compliments as love. And he propositioned that I could make money based off of my body and the way that I looked. And that was something that was persistently coming from him. And it was always followed up with, you wouldn't have to do too much. And when I think about it now, none of these conversations were had about sex trafficking or just even being using our bodies for money. We weren't talking about these things. I didn't talk to anyone around me. And my only perspective was coming from this man who was in my community, who I perceived it as love. And so I think it's really dangerous when we're not talking, when we're not sharing, when we're not having open conversations, because it is causing a problem. And we think it's often out there that's the problem and what we can't trust. But a lot of the things that is what's normal and right around us.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll go next. So I have experience professionally and personally. From the professional lens, a lot of times it's coming from homelessness, it's coming from abuse in the homes, it's coming with self-esteem issues. It's also coming from, again, what Detra said is in African-American communities, we don't really talk about what's going on in our community, or if it's been exposed to from any sexual violence in the home, it's a secret that you don't tell anyone. And then a lot of times with the kids not getting the help, or whoever experienced that sexual violence in the home, they think it's okay because it's already been portrayed on them in their own home where they're supposed to be protected. That is another way that they can really be exposed to it. Personally, how I enter the industry is, excuse me, coming from an abusive relationship, and the things that he taunted me with, I got to a place that I was really struggling, and I was like, if this person don't care for me, then let me see if it will benefit for me to think of what I can do for myself. And with that being said, I entered the life into dancing as a stripper, and it began to perpetuate into other things. And so when I came out as a survivor, I began to educate myself how to help the next person.
Thank you for sharing.
So, coming from a Latino community, I am Mexican, and I've noticed, and I do work, unfortunately, with a lot of survivors of domestic violence, and with this, I've witnessed the effect that this form of like isolation and power dynamic has on individuals. And so, living in a community full of Latinos, as Detra and Addie mentioned, you don't talk about things because that's nobody's business, and that's your business, and you deal with it. And so, I think in this field, one of the biggest things is to educate as many people as you can, because as Ashley mentioned earlier, knowledge is power. And so if we're able to use that towards people's advantage, why not? We gotta encourage everybody.
Absolutely. Tammy, I can unmute. Okay, you got it.
There we go. I was struggling. I'm going to talk about the addiction side of it. So as human beings, we're all created for connection. We all just strive for connection. And when your parents are addicted or family members are addicted, addiction is a feelings disease, meaning we use substances to cover up the feelings we don't want to deal with. And when we don't deal with the feelings, we don't practice vulnerability. And when we don't have vulnerability, we don't have connection. And so when you have a child who has one or two addicted parents, they're craving that connection they're not getting at home. And it makes them incredibly vulnerable to anyone who's going to give them that connection.
Absolutely. Very helpful. And so often too, we hear that this issue is something that happens over there. Oftentimes I hear people say that this is a downtown issue. This is something that happens in downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul. This doesn't happen in the suburbs. This doesn't happen in the rural communities. And so from your experiences, have you been seeing this happening solely in the urban areas, or does this happen in suburbia? Does this happen in rural communities? If it does, what does it look like? Does it look the same or does it look different?
For predators, it doesn't matter if it's from the suburbs or if it's from the rural area or the Twin Cities. When they're looking for an individual to become a sex worker, they're gonna pretty much cultivate their weakness, whatever they're weak at, and they give them that attention, they're going to build that individual up to feel like they're loved and they're cared for. And then once that happens, then they become the perpetrator. And at that point, that individual is either lost and don't know what to do, especially if they're bringing them from the rural areas to the Twin Cities, they have no connections. And what they do is break you from any person that you're connected to so they can have the full control of an individual. So it doesn't matter where, if it's even outside of the United States, it's happening. It's happening in Africa, in India. And when you're looking at outside the country, there's times in poverty that they sell their children into being sex worker in brothels and different things like that in China. So it doesn't discriminate just in the United States to be a sex worker.
I agree with Addie too. I really believe that it's everywhere, and that's the thing that we have to open our eyes to, is it's everywhere. It can be in a one-family household, or it can be a two-family household that gets hit or targeted. It's all about where the esteem is. It's where the vulnerabilities are, whether that's internally or if that's financially. Or just lacking knowledge, just not having the education or the access to the education. I've lived in suburbs. I've lived in North Minneapolis. I think when we look at, does it look different? Yes, it can look different as far as they may not see you on a street corner or find you in a club, but they still are finding you just by being out and being around. And some people intentionally befriend you and get you in the circles of that life.
I work in suburban Ramsey at the moment. I do work with all the school districts in suburban Ramsey, and so with this, I've unfortunately again have worked with individuals who come from Central America, very impoverished areas, And these individuals do go through a lot in their own countries, sex trafficking, domestic violence, like a lot that they go through. And they come here to an area that is very isolated with not very many connections and in this case with Latinos, the available resources in suburban Ramsey for Spanish speaking or just other culturally appropriate services are not there. And so that in itself is already a target and a barrier for families, for individuals to be susceptible, or not susceptible, but unfortunately they are targeted because of that.
I agree with everything you're saying. And as far as addiction goes and substance abuse, it's everywhere. It doesn't discriminate by borders. It's everywhere. It may look different in the suburbs. You may have more prescription pill abuse. You may not have as much meth use. Yeah, more alcohol. It's easier to hide when you have money or when you're in the suburbs. It's so much easier to hide, but it's everywhere.
Thank you. That's helpful. And so as a community member who's this might be something that's brand new, or this might be somebody who's lived experience, but what can we do as community members to keep an eye out for these signs for risk factors? So like what signs and indicators might exist that somebody is experiencing one of these risk factors?
I would say looking at a person's behavior, especially I have a lot of experience with Latinos, and what I've noticed is that sometimes the person doing the speaking, the excuse may be they're using it for interpreting services, but sometimes it may not be. They probably don't even need an interpreter, but there's someone like speaking on their behalf, like at the store or at a doctor's appointment. That's a very common situation for them to be overshadowed. Same with looking at like physical appearance. Maybe it's broad day or in the middle of the night and they're using glasses, or they look very they have very closed body language. That those are very those can be signs of a person that has been experiencing physical harm.
I agree. I believe withdrawn, secluded, oftentimes not making eye contact. Also, how she was speaking about nighttime and wearing glasses. It can be wintertime and they're fully clothed, attempting to cover body, or even how much weight has been lost, and the physical changes in their bodies, or just not wanting to look appealing, and also oftentimes not alone. I know that I've experienced where even going to doctor's appointments, the person had to be right there and answering the doctor's questions on my behalf. So yes, I completely agree.
I don't know how much more I have to add to what you ladies have said already. I think if we're talking about a younger person who's in a family dealing with addiction, you may see a child who's acting older than their age. They may be more sexualized, trying to get attention, more withdrawn, maybe even.
Absolutely. And when you see these types of signs, whether someone's speaking for another person's avoiding eye contact, their body language is indicating that they may feel intimidated, or acting particularly promiscuous. If you're seeing any of these signs in our neighborhoods, what would you recommend the community member do?
So I would like to speak on both questions. Back to the previous questions, one of the signs is if they are with their abuser, 9 times out of 10, sometimes they allow the victim to speak, but before they speak, they have to make eye contact with the perpetrator. So that is one keen sign with youth as well as young women from the age of 15 to 25. That is a typical sign when they are being controlled by the other individual without them saying anything. They're getting permission from eye contact. So that is a major red flag when you're dealing with sex trafficking. Another one with children that they have working at night, and then they still send them to school, either the parents or the, in the technical terms, they call them pimps on the streets. I'm using the word predator because pretty much they're a predator, but the street language is a pimp. And so typically the pimp will allow the young child to go to school, but when they're in school, they're tired. Or if it was a night that they didn't make a lot of money and they abuse that individual, they won't let them go to school. So you're looking out for absences as well. There's a lot of times that they're just totally withdrawn in school, and they might want to open up to an adult that they trust, but they know the consequences of going home. So that is another indicator when you're looking at signs for someone that's being abused with sex trafficking. And then the second one, there's a lot of work being done around this in the Twin Cities and rural areas. So there are hotline numbers that you can call. One of the big organizations is Violent Free Minnesota, and they're connected throughout Minnesota with multiple agencies that are working with domestic violence and sex trafficking. They also have a hotline for children that are experience this as runaways. They have a runaway hotline as well. The Link is a really profound organization for the Twin Cities for youth. And if they are in a rural area, they can call them and they will have an outreach team that will reach them as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Would you be willing to add that contact information into the chat for our audience members?
Yes.
Perfect. And then so for community members, keeping an eye out for truancy, keeping an eye out for, lack of attendance at school, for some of these other signs. If you're seeing them, do you have recommendations? So contacting potentially these resources, are there other people that you should be contacting? Should you be approaching that individual or that youth or that adult on your own? What would that look like for, somebody who might be noticing that in their coworker, noticing that in their classmate, noticing it in potentially a student in your area, somebody in your faith-based community or your neighbor? Like, what would that dynamic look like? And does it vary, or is there a standard process? What do you guys see and recommend?
I will say for myself personally that it depends on the relationship. With my own experience, you would never get me to answer questions directly to anyone. It didn't, I was ashamed and I was fearful. And I knew that the retaliation was always going to be severe. So opening my mouth, even though I'm in a room with people that could help, was not going to happen, because I knew at some point I wasn't going to have those people, and I was more afraid of what I would be dealing with after the fact. So for me, it depends on how close you are. You might be able to get that individual on their own and speak to them one-on-one, but if the predator, the pimp, is directly there, the abuser is directly there, I do not recommend engaging in any type of conversation. I don't believe it's safe. I think it's something that if you might have them one-on-one and you're able to ask, are you safe? Are you okay? You might be able to ask that, and I would let more of you guys speak on that too. But as far as when they're right there, that's a definite no-go. That's where you would speak to police or make a report, in my personal opinion.
And I'm going to do just a quick little side note, because I feel like this will be really important based off the feedback you're giving and we have a question too, where are the predators coming from? And I think especially in kind of a lot of suburban and rural communities too, they're not necessarily like, is it a stranger hiding in a bush? Is it somebody we know? Is it a family member? Like who are these predators? I think that will also help in understanding how to approach the situation.
It could be a family member. It can actually be the parents of a child. It can be a friend. It can be someone in the community that they have built a bond with. It is so broad of who that individual can be. And then not only is it just in certain communities, it actually can be someone as a female that is the perpetrator as well. And a lot of times they're overlooked because you're thinking like two females together, or that could be their child, their sister. There are some people to be aware of as well, because it doesn't really it doesn't have an age, I would say. It does not have a gender to it. It can be anyone that has power and control over another individual. It doesn't matter the ages at all either. Yes.
I would agree with what Addie said. It has there is no one person we can, or there are a specific there's not a specific demographic we could point to. This can happen at anyone can be, unfortunately, a perpetrator. I think going back to your previous question, Ashley, as far as what to do about it, definitely a safety assessment. So if you think, as Detra mentioned, like if you believe that this is something that where is immediate danger to you, to the person, to you, and to those around, I would not engage, mainly because of we don't want anyone to be at risk. Definitely, what I would recommend is if someone has a constant communication, be a constant in that person's life and build that trust. So a lot of the times, I believe it's Detra, you mentioned this, that, being afraid of losing someone, and, that does happen. And it's very difficult to build trust on someone. So, and this would be an ideal situation, definitely something to assess, and depending on the person, on the situation, but being a constant in that person's life and build that trust, so you can hopefully build the communication to where you're able to talk about these things.
Thank you, that's helpful. And Tammy, when you're looking at addictions for individuals, like if you're noticing certain signs or behaviors that somebody might be dealing with an addiction, what can they look out for? And then how would you approach that? Would that look a little different as a risk factor?
I think it's pretty similar to what everyone else is saying. It depends on the relationship with the person. If you see someone who's obviously impaired and they're getting in a car with a child, that's different than seeing someone out in public that you think is under the influence. It's a safety thing as well. If someone's using and they have a child, of course you want to call for help, but I wouldn't engage them. I would not engage them. They're too sporadic. It's too dangerous.
So instead of engaging yourself and approaching that individual, which resources should you contact? Are there certain numbers, like you're observing this and you're like, okay, well, I feel like something sketchy is going on. I'm not sure what it is. What would you do as a concerned citizen saying like, hey, something's not right. I need to say something. Oftentimes we hear that, see something, say something. Who do we say it to? Like, who do we reach out to?
Personally, if I saw someone and a child was in danger or someone was in danger because of substance use, I would call 911. If it's someone I know, you can call Child Protection Services.
I was looking up Sexual Violence Center, as they have a hotline for anonymous calls, and that is a good resource as well, which I can put in the chat.
And for our community or our attendees who are attending tonight too, on the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat button. You're welcome to click on that. They have a series of the phone numbers and contact resources our panelists have been sharing. And then if you do have additional questions on the bottom of your screen, it says Q&A. Feel free to click on that and then type in your question so that we can see which ones that you're interested in learning more about.
Another sign too is they have people in the community that buy sex basically, or call into online services. So when you're seeing a house that constantly have different people coming in and out, different ages, different races, that is a house that you probably want to pay attention to, because most likely they're a John, that they're buying sex from individuals. Also, as another sign is that if it's the perpetrator's home, you're going to see people coming in and out where it's not a lot of people coming to the house, but it's a lot of the people that live there constantly having traffic in and out. That is another sign in your community to know if sex trafficking is happening in that home or if someone's coming to that home to purchase an individual.
And so when we're looking to about, we've seen some of the signs, we have a couple of resources that we can call. What can we do to get ahead of all these problems? There's different risk factors that can lead into exploitation and opening for traffickers. So each of these risk factors can often that material or that emotional vulnerability. What can we do to help feed into those needs early with a healthy person versus allowing that space for a trafficker to fill?
I think it starts with understanding that it can happen in your neighborhood. It can happen to your child's friend. It can happen to your friend. No one's immune. Keep your eyes open. Become friends with your neighbor. Get to know your neighbor. Get to know your child's friends. Volunteer. Make yourself a safe place for people in your community.
Also reaching out to some of the organizations that offer training. Violent Free Minnesota is a big organization that trains on sex trafficking as well as domestic violence. I am one of their partners from my coaching company. And so we're always in trainings and we provide trainings for other individuals, as well as Cornerstone. Cornerstone is a big organization that trains. You can just sign up. Some of it is a cost to it and some of it's free. And right now with everything going on, kind of how we're meeting tonight, they're doing a lot of things over Zoom. Schools are being more active with providing training as well. So I think you would just have to do a little bit more research in your particular community to see what training or what awareness like we're doing tonight is available.
Definitely, I would say that for those of us who are in constant communication with individuals at the same time, for like domestic violence, unfortunately, that involves children sometimes. And I would say talking to kids about, healthy boundaries, what a healthy relationship looks like, what sexual education, those kinds of topics, even though they may be, uncomfortable, especially for certain populations. I know I can definitely speak for my community, the Latinos. It is very difficult to talk about, sexual education and talking about relationships and talking about what all this looks like, because sometimes we're just not taught to talk about this. And so going back again, knowledge is power. So definitely if we know more about this, there is something we can do to prevent it.
I completely agree with everyone. And I really want to draw on those relationships. We have to make it safe. We have to make it normal to have conversations, asking questions, talking about the harder or more uncomfortable topics. We have to talk about the curiosities when it comes to the drugs and the alcohol and even the sexual behaviors. We have to start seeing where the thought process is going from a young child into young adults. Age appropriate conversations have to be had in our homes, but also in our relationships with other people, our friendships. We need to make this more normal to talk about these things. I believe that words truly do hold power. And sometimes we think it's only the things that we're saying. Well, even the things that we're not saying are creating and causing something. It's causing a hidden space, a big empty space that's going to be filled with something. And we want it to be filled with the right things. We want it to be filled with the good things, the fruitful things. So I really believe that we have to just really start working on our relationships and our conversations and just making it normal to talk about things.
Yeah, so to kind of summarize, I'm hearing 1, be consistent in relationships, be present for people, reaching out and being a healthy friend, and just checking in with people as well. How are you doing? What's going on? And just be a consistent presence. You know, when you say you're going to show up to something and have that consistency. I'm also hearing, you know, talking, having these conversations, attending these community awareness nights, and asking those questions. Like, what types of questions should we be asking? You know, how are you doing? How are your relationships? What is your boyfriend or girlfriend asking you to do? Are you comfortable with that? Having those questions and being able to provide a safe space, saying, if you need to share something, just know I'm here for you and I'm listening to you. Making sure people feel heard. That's what I'm also hearing from this group. Third is training. So attending community awareness nights like this. We also, if you follow C.A.S.T on social media, we do post when other training sessions become available from other groups, internet safety, becoming a Minnesota domestic violence or sexual advocate certification training. You don't have to become an advocate in direct client services to attend those. I've attended it and I've seen many community members learn from them. Just going and learning about these issues, because when you come to these events, you start getting these tools and you start learning how to engage in a deeper, meaningful way. I also hear volunteering at places. Tammy, I don't know if you have certain recommendations of places that you would recommend people volunteer at, but volunteering in places where you can build those connections and again, be that healthy relationship for someone as well. Were there any other pieces that I missed?
Can I add to that too, Ashley? I believe that through the conversations too, we're also tearing down a lot of the trauma and the fear and the shame that takes place. And I think that's important. It's huge. We've got to get rid of the shame, the fear, and the trauma responses that we're dealing with when things have happened or when we've been approached that we're not wanting to engage with others or share with others the experiences.
Absolutely. Very helpful. Are there any other pieces that you would want the audience to know when it comes to understanding and getting ahead of the risk factors? Because we do have a series of Q&A questions, so I will answer, or I'll start asking those too, but any other pieces that you think are important to share up front?
I think community awareness, Data and myself have done a lot of work around ACEs, and that's like a really broad topic, but it's really intense trauma-informed care. And with that being said, a lot of times when we had our trainings, we just opened it up and communicated. There was no titles in the room. Everyone that was invited just went by name tag. And we communicated for probably a half an hour to an hour, and just broke that wall down to just interact with someone. And then we also had it where doing some trainings, you don't sit with the people you come. So you have to get to know someone, and opening that up and everyone doing that is going to be allowing someone to kind of not be as defensive entering a room. I would suggest not to start right off with heavy topics. Is really building a rapport with an individual first, and then begin to work on different things. Some of the training for sex trafficking and domestic violence is, if you know someone is in danger and they are opening up to you, you cannot force that individual to leave. So what you should do is give them maybe a card or have them memorize something that they can, if you gave them a card that's a sticky, can go behind the refrigerator. So if you are in danger and need some help, call this number. Also, they check in their belongings, so they can't really keep a lot of things on them. So giving them different ways to try to memorize numbers that they can reach out to. And if they reach out the first time and say, okay, I'm done, but then go back, keep that door open in that space so they can return back to you to say, okay, I'm ready now. We don't want to close off doors for them.
I would also like to point out that, some of us maybe like when you have like there may be a power dynamic. And so, with it being like a teacher or with a student or maybe a doctor addressing a patient, that can be very difficult for somebody to open up to. with the Latino community, there's the topic of immigration, which is a huge topic. And so someone who is possibly undocumented, they will most likely not want to talk about this, which is something very uncomfortable, because then that puts their family at risk and puts their children, their future in safety. And so that's something to be mindful about, that power. Even though, we are all humans, there is that title that does affect how individuals look at us.
And just kind of a question based off of that too. If you're connecting with somebody from the Latino community who may not have documentation, do you have any resources that you recommend that you can connect them with that might make them feel comfortable and safe to seek out help?
Definitely. So in the chat, I will include our clues. I do work with clues. And so with that, we do have a domestic violence hotline number or crisis number, and you can definitely feel free to call that number. Otherwise, when in doubt, if it is something that is urgent, call 911. I think they will be able to provide interpreters if needed. 911 would be a key. I will include this phone number in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to start transitioning over to our Q&A questions as well. And so if, as an attendee, if you have any questions, again, on the bottom of the page, it says Q&A. Feel free to click on that and type in your question. And we will engage in that and try to answer as many as we can in the next 15 minutes here. So the first question that I have is, where is the best place for education to start? With cultural realities that we talked about tonight that hold back conversation, that make people feel intimidated to start talking and feel closed off. Should it happen in the schools? You mentioned having it at the homes, but where else can that conversation happen that we can break down those walls, and what type of resources are out there for parents?
Okay, so I list a few resources that, again, Violence Free Minnesota is a major organization, and in that organization, they're connected with multiple organizations in the community. That is probably a location in your area. I would start there. Also with the schools, I would check into it with the school and see what they offer. And so that is some of the things that I will take initiative to do. Also look to see what they're offering in the community. Sometimes you can just Google sex trafficking classes or domestic violence classes. I would start there. And if you have a good relationship with someone in the school, I will let them know that I'm interested in this, and if they can help me find a program or services that's out there.
I know with C.A.S.T that there is Power Over Predators, which I am actually doing classes on, where C.A.S.T is really working hard to get in the schools and get in the atmosphere so that we can start having these conversations in the schools. So I seen in the chat where someone shared about Canvas Health and really advocating to get some of these awareness and age-appropriate education materials directly in the schools. Because sometimes, we may have kids that don't have stable home lives, and they may not have access to have conversations in their homes. If we can have age-appropriate, healthy conversations in schools where they're safe and where they're not judged, and where they can get some answers and maybe even speak about what they've experienced, I think that's excellent. And I know, like I said, C.A.S.T has the Power Over Predators program where they're going in the school systems that I'm learning about and want to take part in myself.
And if you are interested, if you have a school, a faith-based group, or a community group that you're interested in having C.A.S.T, there's both the student course and there's a parent series that specifically is for parents. It's a video series. We can get you plugged in with that. If that's something that you're interested in, I'll put the email in the bottom as well, but please feel free to email us at C.A.S.T saying, hey, I want to learn more about Power of Predators. And if you're connected with a school, let us know, because we're working on building those bridges and connecting into the schools and engaging with those students. And again, as Detra said, it's all in an age appropriate way, trying to meet students where they're at. And everything that we're talking about, how to help healthy relationships, how to identify and avoid predators. Where are predators? Where are the new hunting grounds? Oftentimes people don't consider, 93% of predators are somebody knows. So it's, only 7% of predators are often strangers. And so how do you identify that, and what can you do about it? All in the context of you are worth protecting, you are priceless, your value will never change no matter what has happened to you, and that you have a way out and we are here for you. And so if you're interested in learning more about that curriculum, I'll add that when the information, the email in our chat as well. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll have amazing presenters like Detra who will come and share with the students and in that community too.
Ashley, can I just piggyback really quick and just speak to parents and caregivers? It's okay if you don't know how to initiate these conversations, especially if you are not coming from having these conversations as a child or in your own home life. But getting that help and those resources to start educating, but also dealing with children who have experienced already traumas and abuses or sexual violence, sexual exploitation, actually allowing yourself to get that training and being empowered to have these conversations and help.
Perfect. Thank you. The second question we have here is, how do we prevent incest? How do we coach and get victims to feel safe enough to report it? Tammy, how do we help young victims report when the sexual act takes years to report? Therapists, parents cannot coach young people due to the law, such as future prosecution, yet some victims behave, some victim behaviors to indicate sexual abuse, if that makes sense for you. Do you have thoughts on that, Tammy?
I guess I'm struggling to figure out what the question really is.
Okay, why don't we start with the first portion, and then I'll reread the second to make sure that we got it understood for Monica here. So how do we prevent incest? And then how do we coach and get victims to feel safe enough to report?
I think it all stems back to what everyone is saying. Early education, creating safe places in the schools, in the community. It's incredibly difficult for children to report incest when it's happening in their home. It's their parents, it's their aunts, it's their uncles. It's incredibly difficult. I think what C.A.S.T is doing and what you're talking about in the schools is a huge step for that.
Perfect.
And making
Monica,
your children feel, oh, sorry.
Oh, nope. I was just going to say, Monica, if you have a follow-up to that as well, feel free to add a second question in there to clarify that second half too. But Addie, go ahead.
The incest part, I have 3 daughters, and I just was always afraid of them ever being victimized by anyone. So I taught them at an early age, your body parts, no one should touch that. I don't care who it is. Just giving them reassurance that is not okay, and educating young boys, because it happens to boys as well. Anyone touching areas that is private to you is not okay. To make everyone laugh, I told my kids it was their candy. No one can touch your candy down there. That's your candy. And so that is something that you build up when they're young, and that kept them in a space that know that if they felt uncomfortable, they can tell me. And another thing, because a lot of times they'd be like, well, if you tell anyone, we'll hurt your mom or we'll do this. And I used to tell my kids, know that your mother is crazy and they're not going to kill me. I'm going to kill them, because they cannot touch your private part. Not that I really was going to do that, but just to really get them to feel comfortable. If something happened to them that they did not feel okay with, that they will come tell me.
To go off of that, I am also a parenting educator for sexual education. And with that, it is very important to talk to the youth about exactly what the name is of each body part. there have been circumstances where, you know, we work with individuals and children who don't know what these body parts are. And so I know one big thing is a case is the child called their body part like a pastry. So let's call it a cake. And so then, well, he was eating my cake. And that's what he said. He was eating my cake. And so everyone is fine because eating cake is normal. That's what we do with cake, right? But in the context, that's not what the child is meaning. And so that's why it is important to talk exactly about what these body parts are, your penis, your vagina, you know, everything, depending on the age of this minor. And so it is definitely very important to have these conversations as a young age, and what is okay, what is not, what is a healthy boundary, and when you need to tell your mom and dad about, or parent guardian about any of what is going on or what happened. If something feels uncomfortable, talk about it. And as Addie mentioned, if they tell you that you cannot tell someone, you know, do it anyway, because that's a flag. That's a red flag. If someone tells you not to do something other than your parents.
And what age is it appropriate to start having those conversations and using anatomically correct body parts? Like, is there a specific age that's appropriate, or what does that look like?
I think it's never too early to start using age-appropriate language.
Yeah. And age-appropriate
Mhm.
context would be anatomically correct.
Mhm.
Penis, vagina, body parts,
Yeah.
all of that. That's age-appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's never
So just like you
one and
learned your
done.
hand.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's never a one and done conversation. It's a continual conversation you have with your children throughout their life.
Great. Are there any apps that we can provide students about this? Some things that we can help to locate them, some things that can be kind of apps that can protect your student or child from potentially like online predators. And if you don't know of any, we will do some research and get that to you, for Chantel.
I do not know of any, but I think, you know, as we were talking about sexual education, also talking about internet and what those risks are and what is okay and what is not.
So we'll get a list. I know that there's several apps that can help with parental controls, with some of those protections. So I will come up with a list and I will send that out to everyone for the community awareness night too, just so that you can learn a little bit more about what those apps might look like too.
And I will say, we, you know, just being engaged, kind of seeing what they're watching, especially with so much access with the different apps, YouTube and things like that. I've seen what was deemed a cartoon that was completely inappropriate with actions, language, body, all of that. So sometimes we, you know, we need to be looking and seeing what they're watching. Let you know, what are you watching? Let's, you know, let's watch it together and really start looking at that. And if they're pulling away or they're not wanting you to see, why is that?
Again, about having those open conversations, and as a parent being courageous enough, you know, it's not always the fun thing to do to be like, hey, I need to see your phone, or hey, put your phone outside your room at night. Like if it needs to be your alarm clock, then it can be on a basket right outside our rooms, or it can be, you know, there's different options available too. But, you know, having that transparency with your child, it's okay to do that. And it's important to do that because a lot of times traffickers, exploiters, and predators, they're counting on, you know, oh, that's an invasion of your privacy. They don't care about you if they invade your privacy. And it's because you care about them that you do have transparency. And that's a part of the conversation to have too.
Clues does offer some sexual education classes for parents and teens. So that I will include the Clues general phone number and you can inquire about that directly.
We have a hypothetical question here. If you have a friend or family member in an abusive relationship, and it might not necessarily be like a physically abusive that you could see, or it might be infrequently physical, it might just be verbal. If that's a situation that you're seeing somebody talking down, using that kind of aggressive language or intimidation, what is the best thing for you to do for your friend?
If this is a hypothetical, if it's a friend, did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. You know, many situations, the way we can address it is, hey, so I've noticed, like if we noticed any changes in this person's behavior, like they're isolating themselves, or they feel like they felt kind of crummy after that engagement, I would say, hey, so I noticed that earlier, you know, you were feeling you were acting a certain way. So like you were more high energy, and your voice pitch was higher, or something like that. And suddenly, right after so and so said this to you, you know, I noticed it kind of, you got quiet a little, or you didn't feel, or it didn't look like you enjoyed that. Do you feel okay? How are you doing? Just checking in and being direct about it if this is a close friend. And if you're okay with having a direct conversation about it, being direct about it, because I think it demonstrates that we are observing and we are caring. There is the possibility of facing backlash. So the person may get angry, it's none of your business, and you don't care, and this is, you know, stay away from this. So that there is that risk, but I think being direct about it can be helpful.
I personally know from being a victim of domestic violence as well, it's something that is shameful and you don't want a lot of people to know. So a lot of times you either make excuses why you don't show up to something or why you're withdrawn. And so over time, what I learned is that just make yourself available for that individual, even if it's sitting in silence, because you're beginning to build a rapport for them that they're trusting you. And then once they open the door and let you know this is going on, then you give them some tips like, hey, this is some information that you can look into, but don't like make them feel like you're directing them to do something, because you want their guards to be down at all times.
Very helpful. So we had another question that talks about the Jeffrey Epstein survivors documentary, and talking about how often that young girls are recruited by their friends into exploitive situations. And how do we raise awareness in our community about these kinds of subtle avenues that end up in exploitation? And what conversations are most effective to help young people understand the risks? And again, those sexual violence or sexual exploitation prevention curriculums like Power Over Predators are all really useful tools, because that's exactly what they're designed to do, is to meet students where they're at in the conversation, and to do it not in a way that's filled with shame or intimidation, but to say, hey, this is a reality that, you know, the trafficker, the pimp, the exploiter is not necessarily the old person hiding in the bush waiting to jump out and grab you. It can be your peer, it can be a classmate, it could be a friend, and here's some red flags that you should keep an eye out for. So engaging in those types of curriculums. So we have C.A.S.T's Power Over Predators program. There's also Act United Youth Aware program, two programs that are fantastic at meeting those needs. So again, if you want to learn more about those, feel free to message us. It's in the chat, the email, to learn more about how to get invested in that as well. And we have one final question here, and then we will wrap up. Or we have two questions. So first question is for ACEs. So I'm guessing Addie, if you can type in an answer of any additional books that could be useful for learning about ACEs, that would be fantastic for resources for adverse childhood experience. And then the second question here is, what grooming behaviors do predators use?
In my experience, it was a lot of compliments, and it was what appeared to be love, and it came across as you would be helping us. You would be helping us by what you could do to make money. and you would be, you wouldn't, I'd still want you, you're still mine, but we need to do this. So it made it a need, it made a desire, and it was smothered in a lot of compliments and a lot of love, or what they called love, but obviously it wasn't love.
So kind of that normalizing some of the behaviors, and it always comes in kind of a form of an escalation. So at first it's like, hey, send me a picture. You're beautiful. I think you're gorgeous. And then it goes to, hey, what's the next step there? And it kind of goes on and on from there.
For the Latinos or just immigrants in general, one big thing is papers, documentation. So, hey, if you do this and this, I'm going to give you a green card or a visa. And that's definitely, I've seen that happen. Definitely something to look out for.
Often using things as leverage. So if you need a roof over your head in Minnesota winters, if you need transportation to school or work, if you need documentation, like all of those, again, that material and that emotional vulnerability is what they target. And so if we can feed into those, providing that shelter, providing those connections, providing and meeting for those material needs and emotional needs, we reduce the leverage traffickers have. So we are at 7:30, so I'm just going to conclude us here right now. So I just first want to say thank you to everybody who came, who joined in, who asked so many thoughtful questions, who wanted to invest and engage with us. The first step is having these conversations. And so again, what can you do? Engage in conversations with your friends. Say, hey, this is something new I learned at this community awareness night. And again, checking out organizations like C.A.S.T and others in the Twin Cities. Check out our website, see the different ways to get involved. And if you have questions, reach out to us. We want to connect you with resources throughout the entire Twin Cities and state of Minnesota so that you can really invest, engage, and be part of that solution side. So if you would be willing to, we'll send a follow-up email tomorrow. If you can click on the little link to a survey to say what your thoughts were for this event tonight to help us continue to make these as fruitful for you and useful for you as possible, we'd appreciate it. And if you want to learn more about the work that we're doing at C.A.S.T, feel free to visit our website at www.castmn.org. Again, my email is in the chat, but it will also be, you can, in the follow-up email as well. I will look up the resources for those apps, for kind of parental support apps to help kind of protect your child from potentially online predators. So I will send that your way. And if you're interested in diving in more, again, check out our website on the Get Involved page. We're so appreciative of everybody. Thank you to our amazing panelists for joining in. We're so thankful for you to share your time and your wisdom and your energy. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care.